The ocean looks beautiful from the shore. Endless blue water, sunlight sparkling on the waves, the promise of adventure. But once you're far from land, that same ocean becomes one of the most dangerous places a human can be. Picture this. You're on a wooden ship in the middle of the Atlantic. No land for hundreds of miles. The wind has slowed, the heat is relentless, and the drinking water barrels are nearly empty. Your throat burns, your lips crack, and every time you look over the side, you see nothing but water you can't drink. That's the cruelest joke of the sea. Surrounded by water and dying of thirst. Most people assume sailors in the past simply endured this or relied on luck. The truth is far more intense. Survival at sea pushed crews to become incredibly inventive. They developed methods that were part science, part desperation, and part pure human stubbornness. Staying alive wasn't about strength, it was about outsmarting the ocean. The first lesson every experienced sailor learned was simple and terrifying: never drink seawater. It sounds obvious now, but in moments of extreme thirst, desperation can override logic. Seawater contains far more salt than the human body can safely process. When someone drinks it, their kidneys try to remove the excess salt by producing urine. But to do that, the body must use more water than the person actually drank. Instead of hydrating, seawater accelerates dehydration. The result is rapid weakness, confusion, painful cramps, and eventually organ failure. Many sailors learned this the hard way, watching crewmates grow delirious after secretly drinking from the sea. So if the ocean was poison, survival depended on finding fresh water anywhere else possible. Rain quickly became the most precious event imaginable. The moment dark clouds formed, the entire mood of a ship would change. Sailors rushed across the deck preparing their collection systems. Sails were stretched tight, angled carefully so rain would flow downward instead of pooling or spilling off the sides. Buckets, barrels, cooking pots, and even helmets were placed wherever water might drip. Every drop mattered. But experienced crews knew something beginners often overlooked. If the sails were coated with salt or dirt, the collected rainwater could become contaminated instantly. So before storms arrived, sailors sometimes rinsed their collection surfaces using small amounts of stored fresh water. It felt painful to spend water when supplies were low, but the payoff was huge. Clean surfaces meant the next rainfall could provide safe, drinkable water instead of foul-tasting brine. During strong storms, ships could gather impressive amounts. A single heavy downpour might refill multiple barrels and buy the crew weeks of survival. Those moments felt like winning the lottery. Unfortunately, the ocean doesn't schedule rain when you need it. Weeks could pass under clear skies. When that happened, sailors had to turn to slower and more creative solutions. One of the simplest involved something almost invisible: moisture in the air. Ocean air is often humid, especially at night. Skilled crews spread cloth, wool blankets, or animal skins across railings and deck surfaces before sleeping. Overnight, these materials absorbed dew from the air. At dawn, sailors wrung them out into containers, collecting small but precious amounts of fresh water. It wasn't enough to fill barrels, but it could keep people alive long enough to reach the next storm or port. Even after collecting water, another challenge appeared immediately: storage. Wooden barrels were the standard containers on ships, but they were far from perfect. Wood breathes, absorbs residue, and harbors bacteria. A barrel that once held rum, vinegar, or salted meat could spoil fresh water quickly. In hot climates, clean water sometimes turns slimy or foul-smelling within days. Desperation pushed sailors to experiment. One discovery changed everything. Instead of scrubbing barrels endlessly, some crews began lightly burning the inside of empty barrels. They rolled a small, controlled fire inside, letting flames char the interior surface before sealing it again. The result was a thin, blackened layer of carbon. That charred surface worked like a natural filter. It trapped impurities and slowed bacterial growth, keeping water fresher for longer. Without knowing the chemistry, Sailors had stumbled onto a technique still used centuries later in modern barrel making for whiskey and bourbon. What started as a survival trick became a long-lasting industrial practice. Still, sailors didn't stop there. They noticed another strange pattern. Barrels that contained silver coins or silver objects often stayed cleaner longer. Water stored with silver developed less odor, less slime, and fewer illnesses among the crew. No one at the time understood why, but modern science explains it clearly. Silver releases ions that disrupt bacterial cells, effectively slowing microbial growth. Hospitals today still use silver in medical tools and filtration systems for this very reason. For sailors, though, it wasn't science, it was proof. A handful of silver coins tossed into a barrel might mean the difference between safe water and sickness. Some captains even reserved silver specifically for this purpose, treating it not as treasure, but as a survival tool. But what happened when the sky stayed dry, the barrels spoiled, and supplies ran dangerously low? That's when sailors turned to the most dramatic solution of all. They made fresh water directly from the sea. The process was distillation. Heat salt water until it boils, capture the steam, then cool it back into liquid. The salt stays behind, leaving fresh water. Simple in theory, extremely difficult on a wooden ship. Crews built crude stills using metal pots, copper tubing, and sealed containers. Fires had to be carefully managed. Too little heat meant no steam. Too much meant risking a catastrophic ship fire. Someone always had to monitor the setup, often through the night. Fuel quickly became the biggest problem. Every plank burned for distillation was one less plank for repairs, cooking, or emergency use. Some sailors burned broken furniture, damaged crates, or spare wood just to keep their still operating. The output was painfully slow, sometimes only a few cups per hour. But in life-or-death situations, those few cups were priceless. When fuel ran short, sailors tried other preservation tricks to stretch what they had. Small amounts of alcohol like rum or wine were mixed into water to slow bacterial growth. Vinegar served a similar purpose, its acidity discouraging microbes. Citrus peels, herbs, or spices were sometimes added, partly to help preservation and partly to mask unpleasant tastes that signaled water was starting to turn. Not every experiment succeeded. Some solutions caused new dangers. Lead containers, for example, seemed durable and resistant to salt corrosion. Unfortunately, they slowly poisoned anyone drinking from them. Sailors became weak and sick without understanding the cause, proving that survival knowledge often came through painful trial and error. Yet human ingenuity kept pushing forward. Some crews developed fuel-free distillation methods using sunlight. They filled sealed animal bladders or containers with seawater and hung them in direct sun. As the water heated, it evaporated and condensed on the inner surface, forming droplets of fresh water that could be carefully drained. It was slow and awkward, but it required no fire, making it incredibly valuable during emergencies. In colder waters, survival tactics changed again. Sea ice contains far less salt than liquid seawater. Sailors collected chunks and melted them for drinking water. Fresh snow was even better, providing nearly pure water. Some crews even built tools specifically for gathering snow and ice during northern voyages. All of these techniques reveal a powerful truth about life at sea. The most successful sailors weren't just brave or strong. They were observant, adaptable, and endlessly resourceful. Their ships became floating laboratories where every idea was tested against one simple question: does it keep us alive? The ocean didn't care about rank, treasure, or reputation. It only respected preparation and creativity. A single clever solution could save dozens of lives. A single mistake could doom them all. And maybe that's the real reason these stories still matter today. They remind us that survival rarely depends on perfect conditions. It depends on what humans do when conditions are far from perfect. Because sometimes the difference between life and death isn't the resources you have, it's the ideas you're willing to try. As days at sea stretched into weeks, something strange always happened to a crew running low on water. Conversations grew quieter, movements slowed. Even the strongest sailors began conserving energy without realizing it. Thirst doesn't just weaken the body, it changes the way people think. Experienced captains knew this was the most dangerous phase of any voyage. Not storms, not enemy ships, thirst. When water supplies dropped too low, discipline could collapse. Sailors started watching the barrels constantly, calculating how long the remaining water might last. Rationing became strict. Cups were measured carefully, sometimes reduced to only a few mouthfuls per day. Guards might be assigned to protect the storage area, not from outsiders, but from their own desperate crew. This pressure forced ships to become incredibly organized about water management. Collection wasn't random anymore, it became routine, almost like a military drill. Certain crew members were assigned to monitor the sky, looking for subtle changes in cloud patterns that might signal rain. Others maintained the sails and collection surfaces, making sure they stayed as clean and ready as possible. Some were responsible for inspecting barrels daily, checking for leaks, rot, or early signs of contamination. Leaks were silent killers. A tiny crack in a barrel could waste gallons before anyone noticed. Sailors learned to listen for faint dripping sounds in the hold and to check the wood for dampness. If a leak appeared, it had to be sealed immediately using pitch, wax, or cloth stuffed into the crack. In emergencies, even melted animal fat could be used as a temporary seal. Every saved drop mattered. Navigation also played a surprising role in survival. Skilled navigators tried to plan routes that increased the chances of finding fresh water along the way. Certain ocean regions were known for frequent rainfall. Others were famous for calm, dry conditions that could trap ships without fresh water for long stretches. Whenever possible, captains aimed to pass near islands or coastal areas where streams or freshwater springs might be found. Land sightings triggered intense excitement, even if the island looked small or uninhabited. Landing parties would rush ashore with barrels, searching for any sign of drinkable water. Sometimes they found clear streams or pools hidden just beyond the shoreline. Other times, they discovered nothing but dry ground and disappointment, forcing them back to the ship with empty containers and sinking morale. Even when fresh water was found on land, it wasn't always safe. Stagnant pools could carry disease. Some sailors learned to filter questionable water through layers of cloth, sand, or charcoal before drinking. Others boiled it first, if fuel allowed. These precautions weren't always understood scientifically, but experience taught crews that untreated water could cause sickness just as deadly as dehydration. Food also affected hydration more than many people realize. Salty, preserved meats, which were common on long voyages, increased thirst dramatically. Smart crews tried to balance their meals whenever possible, eating less salted food when water supplies were tight. If fresh fish or fruit could be caught or gathered, it helped both nutrition and hydration. Juicy fruits from islands were especially prized, sometimes providing enough moisture to slightly reduce the crew's dependence on stored water. Fishing itself became another survival tool. While fish don't provide drinkable water directly, their bodies contain fluids that can help hydrate when consumed fresh. In desperate situations, sailors relied heavily on freshly caught fish not just for food, but for the small hydration benefit it provided. Nothing was wasted. Even the act of catching fish helped morale, giving the crew a sense that survival was still in their hands. Morale, in fact, was as critical as any physical resource. A hopeless crew makes poor decisions. History is filled with stories of ships where panic spread faster than any disease. Some sailors secretly hoarded water, hiding small amounts for themselves. When discovered, it often caused fierce arguments or even violence. To prevent this, strong captains kept water distribution public and transparent. Everyone saw the same measurements. Everyone understood the same rules. Fairness helped maintain order when conditions were at their worst. Still, even the best planning couldn't eliminate risk completely. Sometimes ships were forced into extreme measures. One such measure involved reusing water that would normally be thrown away. For example, water used for rinsing food or cooking might be saved and filtered for later use. Cloth filtration removed large particles, and boiling could make it safer if fuel was available. It wasn't pleasant, but survival rarely is. Another tactic involved adjusting daily routines to conserve moisture. Physical labor might be reduced during the hottest hours of the day to prevent excessive sweating. Work was shifted toward early morning or late evening whenever possible. Shade structures were improvised using spare canvas to protect crew members from direct sunlight. Even small reductions in heat exposure helped slow dehydration. Clothing choices mattered too. While it might seem logical to wear as little as possible in the heat, experienced sailors often kept lightweight fabric covering their skin. Direct sun exposure causes faster moisture loss and severe burns, both of which increase dehydration. Loose cloth actually helped trap a thin layer of cooler air and reduce water loss from the body. Nighttime brought its own opportunities. Besides collecting dew, cooler night temperatures reduced sweating and made physical tasks easier. Some crews scheduled repairs, sail adjustments, or even distillation work during the night to conserve energy and water. The quiet darkness of the open ocean, broken only by waves and creaking wood, became a time when survival efforts continued silently under the stars. Innovation often came from unexpected places. Younger sailors sometimes proposed unusual ideas that older crew members initially dismissed. But in desperate situations, even strange suggestions were tested. If someone believed a different fabric might collect more dew, they tried it. If another thought a new arrangement of pots could improve distillation output, they experimented. Ships that encouraged practical creativity often fared better than those stuck rigidly in tradition. Over time, these shared experiences built a kind of unofficial survival knowledge passed from voyage to voyage. Sailors swapped tips in ports, telling stories about what worked and what failed. One crew might describe how charring barrels saved their water. Another might explain how adding a small amount of vinegar prevented spoilage during a long crossing. These conversations quietly improved survival odds across entire fleets. Looking back, it's remarkable how much of this knowledge developed without modern science. No laboratories, no textbooks, just observation, memory, and necessity. The ocean acted as a relentless teacher, and the price of failing its lessons was often fatal. Yet, despite the danger, humans kept crossing those vast waters again and again. Trade, exploration, migration, and ambition pushed ships farther from shore than ever before. And each time they sailed, they carried not just supplies, but the accumulated ingenuity of countless sailors who had faced thirst before them. Because in the end, surviving at sea wasn't about defeating the ocean. It was about learning how to live with it, one precious drop at a time. By the time a voyage reached its later stages, survival at sea often became a test not just of skill, but of endurance and trust. The routines were set, the barrels carefully monitored, and every sailor knew exactly how precious each sip of water had become. This was usually when the ocean felt the quietest and the most dangerous. Long stretches without rain created a strange illusion of calm. The sky stayed perfectly blue, the wind steady, the sea rolling in slow, endless swells. To an outsider, it might have looked like perfect sailing weather, but to the crew, that endless clear sky could feel like a threat hanging overhead. No clouds meant no rain meant the slow ticking clock of thirst continued. At this stage, experienced captains shifted from normal planning to pure survival strategy. They began calculating not just how much water remained, but how long each person could realistically function on reduced rations. Every decision became connected to hydration. Should they push the ship harder to reach land sooner, risking exhaustion and sweat, or conserve energy and hope for rain, risking running out entirely? There was rarely an easy answer. The crew could feel this tension, even if no one spoke it aloud. Small changes became noticeable. Conversations shortened, jokes faded. Sailors instinctively licked dry lips or swallowed more often, trying to fight the constant dryness in their throats. Even the sound of water sloshing inside a barrel could draw quiet, unconscious attention from everyone nearby. This was when leadership mattered most. Strong captains understood that hope itself was a survival tool. They shared updates carefully, never hiding the seriousness of the situation, but also never letting despair spread. Sometimes they ordered small symbolic gestures, like slightly increasing rations after a successful fish catch or allowing an extra cup after a light drizzle. Even tiny improvements reminded the crew that survival was still possible. Meanwhile, the practical work never stopped. Distillation rigs, if the ship had them, were pushed to their limits. Crews refined their setups over time, learning how to angle metal surfaces to catch more condensed steam, or how to shield flames from wind to maintain steady heat. Sailors discovered that darker metal surfaces cooled steam faster, producing more droplets. They experimented with wrapping cooling pipes in wet cloth to improve condensation. Each small improvement could mean a few extra cups of water per day, and those cups could save lives. Even waste heat from cooking fires was sometimes reused. Instead of letting that heat dissipate, clever crews positioned small containers nearby so rising warmth could assist slow evaporation and condensation. It wasn't full distillation, but every trick added up. Food preparation also evolved as supplies dwindled. Cooking methods that required less water became standard. Stews gave way to roasting or direct fire cooking. Pots that once boiled large meals were now used sparingly, preserving both fuel and water. When possible, sailors ate foods with higher moisture content first, saving the driest rations for later when no alternative remained. Weather reading became almost obsessive. Sailors studied the horizon constantly. A slight shift in wind direction, distant haze, or a faint vertical shape in the clouds might signal a coming storm. Experienced eyes could sometimes predict rainfall hours before the first drop fell. When those signs appeared, the entire ship prepared instantly. Collection systems were cleaned, containers arranged, and every loose item secured so nothing would contaminate the incoming water. The first drop of rain often brought an emotional release impossible to fake. Sailors laughed, shouted, or simply stood silently with faces turned upward, letting the water run over their skin before guiding it into barrels. In those moments, rain wasn't just weather, it was rescue. But survival knowledge extended beyond ships themselves. Some of the most valuable lessons came from encounters with other vessels. When ships crossed paths in the open ocean, they sometimes exchanged more than greetings. News about storms, nearby islands, or known freshwater sources could pass between crews. A single shouted warning about dry conditions ahead might convince a captain to change course and save his crew from disaster. In rare cases, ships even shared water directly, especially if one vessel was clearly in distress. While competition and conflict existed on the seas, there was also an unspoken understanding among sailors. Thirst was an enemy everyone respected. As voyages continued, something else became clear. Surviving at sea wasn't only about techniques, it was about mindset. The sailors who coped best with thirst were often those who stayed focused on routines rather than fears. They measured their rations carefully, avoided unnecessary exertion, and trusted the systems their crew had built. Panic wasted energy. Discipline preserved it. Over time, this discipline shaped maritime culture itself. Ships developed traditions around water management, some practical, some symbolic. Barrels were inspected at the same time each day. Catchment gear had assigned storage places.
New sailors were taught early that wasting water, even accidentally, was one of the most serious mistakes possible. These habits turned survival strategies into second nature. Eventually, after what felt like endless days, the moment everyone hoped for would arrive: land. Sometimes it appeared first as nothing more than a faint, dark line on the horizon. Other times it revealed itself through subtle clues: birds flying in a consistent direction, floating vegetation, or a change in the color of the water. The cry of "land ahead" could transform exhaustion into instant energy. Sailors rushed to the rails, squinting toward the distance, hardly daring to believe it. Reaching shore didn't just mean safety. It meant fresh water in abundance. Streams, springs, rainfall caught in leaves, or even wells dug by previous travelers. Landing parties hurried ashore with empty barrels, often drinking deeply before even beginning the work of refilling containers. The taste of cool, fresh water after weeks at sea was something many sailors described as unforgettable, almost unreal. Only then, once barrels were full and the crew rehydrated, did the tension truly fade. Looking back on these voyages, it becomes clear that the greatest victories at sea weren't always battles or discoveries. Sometimes, the greatest victory was simply arriving with the crew alive, having turned storms, sunlight, metal scraps, cloth, and patience into the one thing every human needs most: water. These sailors didn't just cross oceans, they learned how to survive them. They transformed ordinary objects into life-saving tools and turned harsh conditions into lessons that shaped centuries of seafaring knowledge. And today, when clean drinking water flows instantly from a tap, it's easy to forget how extraordinary that convenience really is. For those who once sailed across endless oceans, every single drop had to be earned through observation, effort, and ingenuity. If this journey into the hidden survival skills of the sea changed the way you think about history, make sure to subscribe and stay with the channel, because there are many more stories where human creativity meets impossible odds and wins.